Hi, I'm Joni Brennan, President of the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. And it's a real pleasure to present to this amazing audience of the FIDO Alliance to talk about trends in digital identity and wallets, and a little bit about our PanCanadian trust framework, our digital identity framework that's working to solve some of the challenges in this space. So let's get into it. So the economic opportunity and impact that we've identified for digital ID in Canada is quite large. It's around $48 to $97 billion. And we see this as being roughly 3 to 6% of GDP. Now we've analyzed a number of studies and we see this is common in every country. So the numbers here are massive and there's quite an incentive for us to work together to solve all kinds of challenges related to digital identity. Now, we took some time to actually ask Canadians what they think about digital identity. And of course, when we're talking in the digital identity audiences, we have our opinions, but we really do need to talk to our customers, our clients, and our citizens and get their perspective. So we did a survey coast to coast to coast and asked Canadians, what do they think about digital identity? We've done this for 2 years now. This is year 2 of the study, and we hope to share year 3 of the longitudinal study with you next year. Now, let's take a quick walk through. Year over year from 2019 to 2020, actually the percentage of Canadians who were willing to share personal information to add convenience to their lives using digital identity rose significantly. At the same time, concerns about information being compromised declined, interestingly, in 2020. So, Canadians are aware of some of the concepts around digital ID. Mainly, they're looking for convenience, especially in a world of social distancing and these challenges. We also saw an increase in people who are willing to learn more, interested to learn more about how does digital identity work and how can it improve their lives. And, no surprise here, 75% of Canadians who were surveyed felt that the pandemic and the need to transact remotely, work from home, social distancing really only drives, COVID-19 really drives the interest in using digital ID to solve these challenges and to help Canadians transact securely online. 9 out of 10 Canadians, which is a huge number, were happy to move to digital ID when they were explained the concept that in doing so, that we could make better services available to people who need the telephone, to people who need to come into the office space. And so, I think this is a great endorsement for the ability to move step by step from a population into the digital space, not digital only, but definitely trying to be digital first, really is a testament to, people's kindness and consideration that, hey, if this is going to help others, then we'd be happy to take our transactions, more digital. So that's a big endorsement from Canadians. Now, when we talk about who is most inconvenienced particularly in the context of COVID, but the group who was most interested in digital ID and adopting it were what we call the sandwich generation. These are people who are parents who are caring for children or people who might be caring for someone who's elder in the house or in the family. So the people that are really managing digital assets, in all aspects of their lives. So these caregivers were really looking for more solutions on digital ID, and they're driving some of that requirement or that desire for convenience, but they need security as well. So. Now, in the Canadian context, again, another large, I would say, endorsing number here. 4 in 5 of Canadians that were surveyed believe that it was really important for the federal government and the provincial governments, to move forward quickly with enabling a safe and secure digital ID ecosystem that everyone can use. So lots of interest and demand here in Canada. Particularly when Canadians were asked if they would like to see public sector move forward more rapidly or private sector move forward more rapidly or both. Well, resounding 66% really felt that public sector and private sector working together in a partnership would have the right checks and balances to ensure that the approach would work for everyone. And then an even split on people who wanted government to go it alone or who wanted private companies to go it alone. So we really do believe that the public-private way forward is the best. And so Canadians did did confirm that through their answers to these surveys. So again, we'll have another study next year, and we'll find out where the trends have gone on Canadians' understanding and interest in digital ID. But to give the audience a little bit of a background on what digital ID looks like today in Canada, I'd like to give you just a little bit of a baseline here. Canada does have a federated governance model. We're a collection of governments that work together to form the country. Your legal root of identity is issued by your province or territory. If you're born in Canada, that's like your birth certificate. If you're born outside and you immigrate in, then your legal root of identity is with the federal government. We do have different authorities that are defined in Canada: national defense, foreign affairs, banking. These are all federal authorities. Things like education and healthcare and resources and some local road regulations are things that provinces and territories have the authority over. So, big question is, under whose authority is identification? And what we see in Canada is that actually digital identification and identification as a whole is not called out in the Constitution as being under any particular jurisdictional authority. So I think that's an important piece of the puzzle when we're thinking about trends and how we go forward. What we see in Canada is a mix of solutions and credentials. Some of those are public sector facing, and some of those are private sector facing, and even by particular industries, regulated or others. So we have quite a mix. We do have benefits. We have a small number of collaborative telecommunications providers. We have a very highly collaborative set of financial institutions and banking institutions that do collaborate. They're mandated to collaborate, and they do so naturally as well. And we also have a very high, we're one of the highest banked countries in the world. Many people are happy to embrace technology for their banking, do most of their banking online, and actually, even a good portion is starting to move fully to doing banking via mobile. So a little bit of where we are on identity. We couldn't have an identity talk without visiting the internet dog. So on the internet, nobody knows that you're a dog. Well, we know where we started, definitely in this New Yorker cartoon that was published in 1994. So we took the 1994 dog, and we ran some scenarios for where we see digital identity going in Canada. And I would argue that this provides a bit of global perspective as well, in terms of possible scenarios. So number one, we know the platform identity. These are the big giants, and in the platform ecosystem on the internet, still no one knows that you're a dog. Number two, operator networks. And so these are more regulated industries, telecommunications providers, banks. And here, the idea is, how can you be a dog if you've got a mobile phone and a credit card and a bank account? The newer trend coming into the scene is the self-sovereign identity. And so on the internet, maybe now you can prove you're a dog if you have the right cryptographic claim. And then the API space. And so, we don't know if you're a dog, but we can tell that you like doggy treats. So much more data driven. And we believe that all of these scenarios, they're not comprehensive. And so, for example, you could have a solution that's a mix of an operator network and a self-sovereign approach. So this is just a way to get an idea of the marketplace. And we believe that all of these scenarios will continue to exist at the same time. And so we've got some tools to address that, which we'll get into in a bit. So what are the common challenging areas that need to be addressed? Well, should be of no surprise. We need to create the right market conditions for adoption of digital identity. And this is true in Canada, absolutely. So we need the right set of standards from a technology perspective. Certainly there is a lot of work that's being done across Canada and around the world in the standards space, and the right regulatory framework. And so we know that government has an important role to play in terms of what we talked about earlier, the different types of orders of government and jurisdictions or not. And so regulation around data, what data is available, how we can access that data, I think is an important piece of the puzzle. Now, looking at promoting market growth is certainly a common area that needs to be addressed. And when we consider sustainability, it's important when we're looking at these different scenarios and these different models that we understand how they will be sustainable from a business model perspective, as well as from a liability and data management perspective. We also need to understand inclusion. And so when we're looking at digital identity, it's not only ensuring that every organization can participate in this ecosystem. It absolutely has to be socially inclusive to ensure every Canadian can participate and be equally represented in this ecosystem and have the right level of equity and participation that's necessary as we build a digital Canada that works for everyone and helps us to realize that economic opportunity that we talked about in the opening. So let's talk a little bit about digital ID particularly, and let's talk about the wallet space and what we see going forward there. We have developed in DIACC, I would say, also 2 papers for you to note. We've got a Making Sense of Identity Networks paper, and so I highly encourage people to have a read on that paper. The content still stands today. And we do have a Making Sense of Digital Wallets paper that lays out some key guiding principles, some key guidelines for what digital wallet design can and should look like. And so you'll notice as we go forward, these are all shoulds. They're not criteria just yet, but we are working on solidifying these into some more criteria. So number 1, a digital wallet should be user-centric in design. We know that these wallets need to work for the users at every time, anytime. They have to support users if things go wrong. They have to support all the actors within the ecosystem when the Canadians need it. And they have to provide also users with evidence that principles are being supported as they're going through in that design. So for example, how will I as a user know that maybe one wallet is more trustworthy than another wallet? And so Canadians definitely need tools to help with this management. 2, wallets need to be should be designed to protect the user's privacy. And so if we think about here, the wallet has to provide users with visibility and control over the disclosure and storage of particular identity credentials. The wallet also has to support network and business models by enabling those policies to support minimal disclosure. And the wallet has to prevent any possible collusion across network operators. And has to work any collusion across identity providers or relying parties as well. And finally, the wallet has to provide direct disclosure to any party, and prevent surveillance by any third party along the chain of conduct for how a credential is managed or shared. The third key guideline for digital wallet design is that, of course, a wallet should be secure. And so it needs to provide users with the information and tools to help securely manage, store, and disclose identity information. It also needs to identify and authenticate all parties in the transaction. And so, wallets certainly haven't moved the requirement for authentication away. We have to be able to strongly authenticate to these wallets, in addition to being able to know if it's a wallet that we can trust or not. They have to use modern day security standards, and they have to use modern software development and best practices. So some things to think about in the wallet design space. The fourth guideline for digital wallet design is that wallets should be interoperable. And so, we know in this community, you're well aware and prioritizing technology and other levels of interoperability. So wallets have to use modern identity standards for information exchange and sharing. And they need to support different network business models by enabling the policies and the governance that are set in particular networks where those wallets will be used. And the last principle for wallets, the last guideline, for digital wallet design is that wallets should be accessible to all Canadians. Wallets should support modern industry standards and specifically accessibility, and they should be available for all Canadians to use regardless of their financial ability. So again, this inclusivity and equitability in terms of participation. And wallets should provide intuitive, simple and familiar, informative user experience so that users are in a better position to make good choices about where and how they're sharing their credential for a particular transaction. So if you want to learn more about the key guidelines and the terms used within around digital ID wallet design, I do recommend you check out our Making Sense of Digital Wallets paper, and we'll see a little bit more as we move forward. How we can actually start to set criteria to verify digital wallets and how they are performing across the different networks and different solutions. So, of utmost importance, how do we ensure that identity will respect citizens and consumers who are intended to be the beneficiaries of these solutions ultimately? Well, first of all, we need a framework, and this framework has to unlock identity network's utility. And so if we go back to the 4 scenarios that we showed you, what we do see is we do believe that there will be a small number of networks for verified information sharing. These networks will be built with different technologies and using different governance models and using different liability models at times. So all of this can create a very confusing landscape, especially for the user. And the user needs to be able to have tools to understand if they should have more trust and confidence in a particular network or a particular wallet or a particular mechanism for authentication. It needs to be plain and simple for people, but it also needs to be plain and simple for the decision makers within an organization who are trying to determine if one particular model is where they should invest or perhaps another model. From the DIACC perspective, we do say in the technology neutral space, because back to the beginning, we do see multiple scenarios coming forward at once. And what we think is an important piece of this ecosystem is that I, as a user, as a consumer, citizen, or other, as well as the organization on the other side, we have to have confidence we have to know what kind of confidence we can have in these different scenarios and in these different solutions that are going forward. And this is where the PanCanadian Trust Framework comes into play. And so the PanCanadian Trust Framework is a framework that provides guidelines for how data requesters, and data requesters could be a government entity, a university, a bank, a telecommunications provider, any organization or person who is on the other side of a transaction and is requesting information from you to perform a transaction. So you're consenting to share this information, you're exercising your privacy needs and your determinations on the ethical use of how you're sharing this information. This is all in your control, but you need to also be able to have a list of who can, the verifiers who can verify that information that's needed to perform that transaction. And so you can see as well that the verifiers can be very similar kinds of organizations. They can be governments, universities, banks, telecommunications providers, certainly not a comprehensive list. And so as we move forward, we need to know across different technologies, how can we trust, how can the requester have confidence that the income total that you're sharing, or your date of birth that you're sharing, or your address of record is accurate, and that they can have confidence in these details? And so that's where the PanCanadian Trust Framework comes into play. So let's look a bit about the PanCanadian Trust Framework. The PCTF is a information assurance framework. It lays out the business, legal, and technical processes for a service, a solution, a network, how that service or solution or network is constructed against a particular level of assurance, and provides a baseline that can be audited and assessed by qualified information security auditors, so that people, businesses, governments can get signals about whether or not they can have confidence confidence in the information that's being shared, and that the mechanisms that are being used to request and verify that information are to a particular baseline as set out in the PanCanadian Trust Framework. So we've got some baseline materials in terms of how we're governing this information assurance framework and the terms that are used within, as well as the requirements for assessment and accreditation by information security auditors. And then we've got what we call more specified components of the PCTF. As you can see, authentication is key front and center. More on the functionality side of how we're building out the functions. Of course, notice and consent, if we're looking at a digital wallets ecosystem as one of the mechanisms in the many scenarios that we see ahead, then notice and consent of how the user was engaged is a required piece of the puzzle, particularly here in Canada. We also have components laid out that are more on the identity proofing and validation. So how do we verify a person? How do we verify an organization? And then the notion of how can we verify a relationship or a particular attribute, and that falls into our credentials component of the PCTF. And finally, how is the infrastructure laid out for that solution, service, or network? And again, we expect different technology profiles to be leveraged here. We certainly expect to see FIDO contributed to and develop specifications, as well as many others in this ecosystem. And so we're really providing a mechanism to help glue the context together from an assurance perspective on how these transactions would flow. Version 1.0 of the framework was released in the fall of last year. We've been busy at work alpha testing this framework, and particularly with a big focus on our all-encompassing component, which is our privacy component. So we've built privacy into every piece of this framework, as well as ensure that it was all-encompassing as a foundation for how this framework is built, and not as an add-on. We expect to see, we're learning through our alpha testing process, and we expect some revisions to come shortly as we operationalize the PanCanadian Trust Framework, which is a very exciting time. So that brings us to the Voila Verified program. The Voila Verified program is how we will actually have information security auditors who will be accredited by DIACC as recognized to perform PCTF based assessments. They will, when there's a technology verification required, they will work with their own tools or an accredited laboratory. They will provide us with reports back on whether or not verification has been provided, that they are complying, that a service, solution, or network is complying to the PCTF. We think this is an important piece of the puzzle. We know that it is, given the complexity of the many different types of solutions that we see going forward, as we talked about, and the many different scenarios that we see on the ecosystem coming forward here in Canada, but also around the world. The PanCanadian Trust Framework is that tool for understanding if you can have particular degrees of confidence in what you see coming out of a solution, whether that's using a wallet or another approach. We're looking forward to launching this program early in 2022. The first components that we'll be focusing on will be the verified person and the privacy, and more of the components will roll into the program as we go forward throughout this year. We will be keeping a trust status list that is basically a registry of all of the PCTF trust mark holders and any conditions or particular profiles that they were leveraging. So we're thrilled to launch this program early in the year. And in case I haven't noted it before, all of this information is available in both official languages, English and French. And so you can find this all on DIACC.ca. So if you'd like to learn more about the Voila Verified program and what that means and where FIDO and other specs can fit into this ecosystem, we'd love to talk with you. Now, a little bit about who we are. We are the DIACC, and we are working together to build a digital identity ecosystem that works for all Canadians. And so what we see is there's a need to contextualize the different pieces of the puzzle, whether that's technology, the standards that are being developed, the public policy needs to gain clarity on how we can access data, who can be in control of data. We see many pieces of the digital ID puzzle. And so DIACC's role and mission is to accelerate. We're an adoption accelerator for digital ID, and we're here to provide that context across these different pieces of the puzzle for how they work together, what's important for you, what's important for your customers as you move forward, and to help that adoption and that traction and growth of the number of transactions move forward. Our second, the other role that we play is as a trust framework provider. And so we spoke about the PanCanadian Trust Framework. I think we'll also see potentially the group is working on determining if we have a specific set of criteria, a PCTF component for digital wallets. So we'll see where that comes out from the working group later this year. So working together to accelerate adoption and to operate that PanCanadian Trust Framework program, Voila Verified. Just two of the things, that we're doing to help to move this ecosystem forward, and to get back to that where we open the presentation, that 3 to 6% of GDP, which is so desperately needed as we're building back economies and recovering and still managing through, the COVID pandemic. So we are about 110, maybe 115 member organization. We're continually growing. We do benefit from members of both the public and private sectors of Canada, as well as multinational global organizations who are really keen on solving digital identity that works for the digital economy. So we'd love to talk with you about how you can get involved. We're proud liaisons to the FIDO Alliance. This is it really does take a village to move digital ID forward. And we believe that collaboration is the best way forward to solve complexities across a landscape. It's amazing to see all the work and progress that's been made by the FIDO Alliance. And so we think that there's a great opportunity here to leverage an information assurance framework like the PanCanadian Trust Framework, coupled with FIDO Alliance-driven specifications, as well as others, to create that end-to-end and to verify that end-to-end experience that's needed for that digital ID adoption acceleration. So if you'd like to learn more about the PanCanadian Trust Framework, our digital ID research and what we're doing to accelerate adoption, and how we can collaborate or how we can work together to reduce some of the complexities of this ecosystem and move us all forward, we'd love to get in touch with you. So please send us a mail or get in touch through other channels. Again, it's a real pleasure to present to this audience. And again, I'm Joni Brennan, president of the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. And I really appreciate your time and all the contributions that you're all making to moving digital identity forward with security, privacy, inclusion, and equity for the benefit of all. So thanks so much for your time today, and I'd love to continue the conversation through other channels. Have a great event.